The tall, gangly thing?
Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by a man who needs no introduction, but I will do it anyway. It's Riot TFT lead designer, MORTDOG. Mort, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, no problem. Like I said, your interviews have always been really cool, so happy to be a part of one finally.
Now, on the off chance that someone's watching this interview and doesn't know who you are, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Mort. I am the lead designer of TFT, which basically means I'm in charge of sort of the direction of the game, working with sort of our producer TJ to make sure everything's on the right track, specifically on the design side especially. So this means working with the live team, making sure they're doing the right thing, the sets team, making sure the set's in the right direction, fitting our goals for the game as a whole, as well as any interaction between other teams at Riot, the engineering team, the art team, things like that. So just basically kind of at the highest level, making sure everything goes the way we want it to go on TFT.
Now, we'll touch on TFT in a little bit, but I kind of want to back up and kind of talk about your trajectory as to how you even ended up where you are in the first place. Where were you, early on in life as a game developer?
Yeah, so I think my story growing up was pretty typical. I was one of those kids that literally wanted to play video games every chance he got. Growing up on NES, Super NES, that kind of stuff. It was one of those things where basically anytime my parents would let me, I would play games. If I wasn't allowed to play games, I would actually read like the Nintendo powers and the strategy guides just to like get games in my mind. Like I was 100% games growing up. So when it came time to pick a college, I knew I wanted to be a game designer. I went to University of Washington for a semester and realized that wasn't going to help me. So I dropped out and then ended up at a school called DigiPen. DigiPen at the time didn't have a game design degree. They only had engineering and art. But I thought that was my best shot at the industry. So I actually have a game engineering degree. But during my sophomore year, an internship opened up at Nintendo. And I applied for it, got it. And then ended up working there for 11 years. I worked on 8 different titles while I was there. Started off as a level design intern, worked my way all the way up to game director. I shipped 6 Mario vs. Donkey Kong titles and a few other games. And Nintendo was like, hey, we want you to make a 7th Mario vs. Donkey Kong game. And I was like, I don't know about that one. I kind of need to start growing as a developer. So I applied to one company, which was Riot. Got the job, worked on the skins team for a while, doing things like loot, events, the new leveling system that League has where you could level past 30. That was one of my first big projects. Worked over on game modes, doing things like the Odyssey game mode, helping with Nexus Blitz, things like that. And then eventually to TFT, and that's sort of like the really fast version. But basically games have always been my life. And so just kind of working hard to get where I am today.
Wow, that's wild. What a crazy path. I had no idea that you worked at Nintendo. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I was wondering actually, because I'm going to ask you a little bit about making a game in the auto chess genre. But one thing that just came to mind is how did all of your experience at Nintendo, working with the leveling system at Riot, all these different projects, actually help you in developing a game that was so new in the auto chess genre like TFT? Was that did you feel like you were actually prepared because of all your experience on those other games?
So one thing I do want to clarify, when TFT was first being developed, that first like 4.5 month sprint, I actually wasn't involved at the time. I was there on the sideline doing a different project and would occasionally give input, but actually I wasn't part of the core team at the time. That was a smaller team and they worked really hard on it. And again, I would give some advice and things like that. About 2 weeks before ship, I ended up I got asked to join the team as the lead designer to replace the old lead designer. And so I said yes, and felt like because I wasn't there from the start, I kind of had to prove myself. But to answer your question, though, coming in, TFT is a game a lot about like randomness, and it's not about randomness, but it has elements of randomness to it. And there's a way that at Nintendo we learned how to do randomness to kind of help the player have an enjoyable experience. Because if you look at randomness at its extremes, you can have some really bad outcomes, right? The example I always use is like if you roll a dice 5 times, you can roll 1 5 times. That's an outcome that happens. That's not a fun outcome. Should that be allowed in the game? And so things like that, where Nintendo had a really cool approach about making sure the experience was good for everybody, no matter what, really helped me on things like our loot system, making sure that the outcomes were fair. I actually helped pioneer some of the pity systems that are in our loot, just to make sure that you didn't get screwed. And like some of that helped with TFT, improving our systems like the item drops, the distribution of things, as well as some of the mechanics. So Nintendo, like I said, really taught me a lot about player experience first. So.
It's funny you say that. I've heard this example a lot, that people say like, okay, well, 75% chance, is that a Pokemon 75% chance or a Fire Emblem 75% chance? So it's interesting to hear that you actually are manipulating the RNG to develop what you believe to be the best player experience. Is that fair to say?
Sometimes there are certainly, like, for example, the loot system, right? Or the item drops in TFT. It's not, literally here's 9 random items, because you could get 9 cloaks, and that would be terrible. But at the same time, we don't want every game to be you get exactly one of each item. That's boring. So it's coming up with a system that's sort of in the middle of that feels like you get enough variation, but doesn't feel like you get screwed over. And some of cool systems design comes into how do you basically get that outcome in an algorithmic way so that the engineers can implement it in a way that makes sense. And oftentimes that's like tables, formulas, things like that. In the items case, what we do is we call the bag system. Brief explanation. Basically, there's one of each item in the bag, so it's random. But then at each carousel, we put one more in the bag. So that basically the odds of getting 3 swords are drastically lowered because there's so many less swords to draw from, but still possible. So, as an example.
Yeah, that's really cool. So it sounds like the TFT team internally has changed a lot since its inception. Is that true? What's that looked like?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. If you look at the original team that put together the game, I think only Whitrock is really left. There might be a few artists that are also still there. But generally, we've shifted almost the entire team. And I think that's okay and makes a lot of sense, because there are certain people that have a skill set of developing something new and can do that very well. And then there are people that have a skill set of like polishing something up, making it better, a skill set of maintaining things, as well as just different interests, right? Like some people, even though they helped make TFT, weren't necessarily interested on staying on TFT for the rest of their career. They wanted to move on to other things. We had a few people move on to like Valorant. One of our designers who actually helped with the Galaxies mechanic and things like Aurelion Sol is now lead champion designer on League of Legends. So different opportunities pop up. And that's one of the things about working at Riot is as long as you are, a good worker and things like that, you can kind of go wherever you want as long as the opportunity is there and you've kind of proven yourself. And so the team does shift a lot.
So when I first joined the scene back in set 2, one of the things that really stood out to me was how visible you are. It's not every day that you play a game where the lead designer or really anyone of like an upper position in a game is so visible on YouTube, on Twitch, on Twitter. You're constantly engaging with the community, which is awesome. It makes it so that people like me can just reach out to you and get you in for an interview. But it also opens you up for a lot of negativity. What is that like?
It's weird. I'm not gonna lie, it's weird. It feels like a weird exception because certainly, Riot has had its history with some people who maybe say things they shouldn't and are visible and things like that. Thankfully, I've got a pretty good grasp. I'm not perfect. I've definitely had my screw ups, but thankfully nothing major. But the thing is, when I was growing up and as a kid, as a fan of games, whether it was like playing World of Warcraft or Smash Brothers, like the idea of talking to a developer would have been mind blowing, right? Like imagine I could just walk up to Sakurai and be like, I love Smash Brothers. Could you answer some questions? Holy crap, this is inspiring. And now that I'm in this position, I kind of feel like, the golden saying of like treat other people the way you'd want to be treated. It's like, why not do the same for all the, people who'd want that as well? And one of the things that attracted me to Riot in the first place was actually some of the early communications they used to do with people like Morello and Ghostcrawler, where they were very forward. And that's one of the things I liked about the company. Whereas Nintendo, it was like, you hide in a box, you don't exist. Nintendo is the company. And so I kind of took that opportunity to sort of give it a try. I was doing that through Twitter. And then my wife was actually the one who suggested, like, why don't you try streaming? People might like that. And I'm like, okay, sure, I'll give that a try. And that took off surprisingly. And then a lot of players were like, hey, I can't always watch your stream. Could you post it on YouTube? And I'm like, okay, I guess. And then that took off, and it was like, okay, well, I got to keep doing these things. But to your original question of like, is there negativity? Yeah. But there's also a lot of positivity. I would say it's like an 80-20 ratio, like 80% positive. There's a lot of people like, I love your game. It's so much fun. I like watching your streams. It's informative. I think at least 10 times a weekend, I get people like, yeah, I just caught the game. This is my first stream. Wanted to say hi. And like, that's the part that matters. The 20% of people negative, I often have to remind myself that like, they're unhappy for something, they're coming from a place of, frustration, sadness. And so like, naively, sometimes I try to talk to them and try to like work it out. Other times it's not going to work. And, sometimes I've had to take a step back sometimes because it's not easy. I'm not going to lie, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it's worth it. And I care enough about TFT that it's worth the price.
Yeah. As someone who's made content of different sorts for a while now, I know that like it's very easy to gravitate towards the negativity surrounding the things you make. But I mean, it's an obvious thing to say, but you always have to just kind of hold on to the positivity around you, right? And you just have to take it in strides and understand that like there's criticism and then there's negativity, and there's a clear difference. And when you recognize the difference, it in theory makes it easier to kind of withstand just the blatant negativity.
Yep.
Now, there is something I will say. I think very few people would have something negative to say about you, which is that you've been doing commentary in a lot of events lately, and it has been incredible to see such insight on the desk. I mean, what other game really has someone who's worked so closely with the game actually on the commentary desk? You did the World Championships for Set 4. You did the first event in Set 5. Have you always wanted to cast, or is it just something that came up and you took the opportunity when it was there? Yeah,
it is not something I was interested in, to be honest with you. I'm not like, it's like, oh, that's cool. They get to talk about video games. But it's one of those things like, I'm the kind of person that I like the things I really like. And if you start talking to me about those things, could go for hours. Me and Riot Jag used to have conversations and would just go for like 4 hours, and everyone around us would be like, stop talking about League of Legends. We get it. So commentating about TFT in particular, which I care gross amount about, it was like, you're asking me to go on camera and talk about TFT for hours? Hell yeah, let's do it, and taught me a new skill and gave me something to try out. So I've been enjoying it. It's not something I'd ever like do professionally. Game design comes way first. And to be honest, even on the TFT side, I might try to back out a little, only because I don't want to take the opportunity from somebody who like really wants to do it and is really passionate about it. For me, it is just like, it's a fun thing. I'm happy to do it. If anyone asks, I'll be like, sure. But I also don't want to block some up and comers when I've got the game design on the side. So I love doing it, but yeah, not something I was like, I can't wait to be a caster. Like, it's fun.
Now, bouncing off of that, just let's talk about the competitive scene in general. Mm-hmm. Set 4 really saw, I mean, in my opinion, the birth of what I think is going to be, we'll look back and say that Set 4 was the birth of competitive TFT. Obviously, Set 2, we had the big send-off for Lobby 2. Set 3 had the World Championships. But Set 4, at least, in North America, we really saw the structure start to take place. And in Set 5, it's been expanded, and today was announced that we'll have the World Championships in China at a live LAN event.
Yep.
What are your thoughts around the competitive circuit for Set 5?
Or for Set 5 in particular, I think Set 5 is looking hype. I think there is this one awkward part that we're going to have to deal with, which is in order to make the live event happen, there has to be travel plans. And in order to have those travel plans, you sort of have to decide who's going pretty early. Which means there's going to be this like dry spell right after 5.5 ships where it's like, we'll do a few things. And then all of a sudden there'll be this like month and a half gap where the world's people have been decided, but the event's not till October. That's kind of unfortunate, but I think it's going to be worth, because everything I've heard about the Reckoning finals is going to be hype. That's all I can say. But yeah, the fact that like structure is starting to happen is really big here. We took a big hit when COVID hit. Like, we had plans for Galaxies, And if you remember, Galaxy shipped right as COVID quarantine happened. Like, I remember it vividly because it was literally like we had just done the Invitational live for Galaxies, and then we went back to work for one day, and then it was go work from home. By the way, Galaxies is shipping the next day. So it was like crazy for us. And everything in Galaxies was thrown up in the air because of COVID. But now the world is starting to get used to it, and we're starting to get structure. We're starting to find great partners. NA, for example, has Giant Slayer, who have been amazing. So it's starting to come together, and I can't wait. And we're starting to understand that, like, where the hype moments are. You know, you talked about the Fates Championship, and I gotta say, those finals were hype. Like, there were crazy moments. 8 jaywalking coming away, 8L jaywalking coming away with the win. It was just like, it was exciting. And it kind of proved, like you said, that it's coming. So I can't wait for more of that. And to top it all off with Reckoning, we purposely designed this set as a risk that this was going to be one of the most competitive sets. You know, it's got a very complex trait structure. There's the item system. There's the agency behind the armory. You know, and so seeing how some of our pro players play that set in the competitive scene, I think is going to be very exciting. And honestly, even like Twitch Rivals just ended today, and that was fun to watch, despite the sort of flaws of the Mordekaiser meta, you know. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you know, and even with, like you mentioned, the dry spell after 5.5, you know, it does also kind of raise the opportunity for third-party tournament organizers to come through. I mean, that's what Giant Slayer was originally, right? Giant Slayer became a partner by having these third-party tournaments that were really successful, and the people loved it. So even though we may not have tournaments that are leading into Worlds in 5.5, I think that there's still plenty of opportunity for the competitive scene to flourish in that set. And it's a great opportunity for third parties to rise up.
I 100% agree with that. So hopefully that happens.
Now, Set 5 has been live for a couple weeks. And so what I would love to know is what are your thoughts on the initial reception of Set 5?
Okay, so going into Set 5, we had a shot call, which was our engaged players are going to love this thing. They're going to love it to death. But holy crap, are we nervous about the idea of some of the, you know, middle to low engaged players? Will they be pushed off by the, you know, complication, the new item system? Will they miss Chosen? Plus, you know, we never get enough testing, so it's like, is the game even actually fun? You know, we're always coming in hot because we make our sets last minute because we're a small team. So far, the initial reception has exceeded our expectations. I can't go into too much detail yet, but we were very happy with the results. I give a big portion of that credit, though, actually, to the marketing team. Things like that cinematic that they created were really well done. And I think that drove a lot of players to be like, oh, yeah, TFT is still like looking hype, looking good. As well as some of the influencers who got to play, you know, some of the set early on PvE, giving a lot of like, wait, this set's really good. I think all of that in conjunction kind of put us in a really good spot. So we're past the initial hump where we're like, the initial reception is great. We kind of knew that. Our next big hump for us is like, where are we in a month? So we kind of want to see where that is. But again, right now, things are looking pretty good. Really good.
You know, you're talking about like the advanced trait structure, giving players agency. And it reminds me of something that I talked with Esports Law in my last interview about, where we noted how Set 4, you introduce the chosen mechanic, where players are forced to be a little more flexible so that their chosens can fit their comp, their items, you know, build these boards, versus Set 3 and 2, where it's a little easier to just force a comp. And now that led into Set 5, where you're giving players more agency with the armory. So it feels, from the outside looking in, like these two sets fit perfectly together. Was that an intentional design to make them fit together like that?
Sort of, is what I'll say. Whenever we're designing a set mechanic, we always start off with some upfront goals. And usually those upfront goals are like, we look at the state of TFT, and we're like, how could we get TFT to a better state using our set mechanic? For example, you mentioned Chosen. Chosen was very much about, okay, forcing is just way too dominant of a strategy. You know, no matter what we do, it seems like there are people that will force no matter what we do. What if we made a mechanic that said, hey, you can't force? What does that look like? And we went through a few iterations to get to Chosen, but that was kind of the primary goal here. Galaxy's goal, for example, was like, we need to add variations so that after your 500th game, you're not bored. Because we did see a lot in like Rise of the Elements that it was like, this is fun, but after my 100th game of Some Sins, I'm like, I get it, And so Galaxies was all about keeping it fresh, so that you'd be willing to play 500, 1,000 games. With Reckoning, our goal was very much like, hey, all of our set mechanics up until now have been very much like, you have the game, and here's a curveball, deal with it. And it's like, okay, that's been working, but can we do a set mechanic that isn't that? That's actually like, hey, here's a part of the core game. Go enjoy the core game again. Stop dealing with all these curveballs. Kind of get back to basics. And because we had such a complicated trait structure and a more difficult set, it was a good time to take the set mechanic back and go, okay, the set mechanic won't be as complicated. And I know it sounds complicated because like, oh my God, there's 36 new items. But actually, there are 36 items you're already familiar with a twist. And I think even now we've already seen a week after launch that like people got it pretty quick. It's like, yeah, the shadow version, that's the one that kind of makes me lose health. But okay, cool. Yeah.
I think the design of it is like simple enough where even if you don't understand what the shadow item does, you understand that it hurts me somehow. So I know that it's going to make me strong. It's going to hurt me a little bit. And that in of itself is simple that anyone can kind of just pick it up pretty quickly. Right.
Yeah. So to that end, it's like, do Fates and Reckoning work together? Yeah. But it wasn't so much about like the two sets in unison, so much as it is about making a mechanic that we think's push TFT to the next level and try something new. So.
I love it. I mean, I think Set 5 is really doing some awesome things in the community and is fun both on a casual and competitive level. Now, over the last 5 sets, we've seen some really wacky innovations. And so I've got a two-part question because I think that a lot of times when you see these crazy builds, it's not always intended by the developers. So the first question is, 1, what is your favorite champion that your team has designed? But 2, what is your favorite composition that you've seen the player base come up with?
So I get this question a lot of like, hey, were there any compositions you didn't see coming? And the answer is always yes, because, there's 58 champions. You do the math on like how many combinations are there, and it's like, there's a lot, right? Like mathematically, it's in the billions. It doesn't matter, whatever. We can't test that all before we ship. There's just no way. And typically, you can look at the trait structure and kind of see where we were going, right? Like, how does a Legionnaire comp work? Well, there's 8 of them, so it's pick 6, grab one of the 4 cost carries. Well, Draven synergizes better with it. Cool. Like, that's kind of how a basic comp looks. It's where the innovations start coming in, where it's like, wait, they're combining what now? Kick in that you're like, okay, I guess that makes sense. Damn, we didn't realize how well that would sync together. Oops. Like most recently, I think Spirit Zed was one where it was just like, we did not realize how much Zed really liked Spirit. Oops. So I wouldn't call that my favorite, but it's like, that's definitely a oops, didn't catch that one. We clearly had to nerf it a bunch.
Yeah, I know you had a recent tweet about some of these crazy comps ending up actually being some of the most memorable parts of TFT. I mean, Warweek or Warweek are some of the ones that really stand out. But you're right, like there to some extent, when you have these oopsies on the balance side, it actually does lead to something that everyone can kind of point to and just say like, oh my gosh, remember that crazy meta that TFT had? Even though it may not feel great if you're trying to climb ranked, it's very fun to be a part of and fun to look back on, even if it's just for a good laugh, right?
Yep. I think my favorite one that ended up coming to life, though, that we really should have caught was probably Monoprinter Sona, just because it did some really wacky stuff. And then there was one that a few people figured out even afterwards, but didn't try it as much, was Monoprinter Blitzcrank. There was a version where, because Blitzcrank cast instantly, he would give a bunch of mana to his team instantly, and then that would just sort of snowball the fight for you in pretty ridiculous ways. So probably one of those is probably my favorite of all time. As far as which champion is my favorite, it's really hard to pick because there've been so many, but you have to go with like one of the really unique ones, I think. things like Aurelion Soul in set 3. But the one I have to give the most props to was actually Bard from Galaxies. Because I think Bard was... I remember when Witty pitched it to me, because it was Witty's original design. And he pitched it to me, and I looked at it, and I'm like, this is insane. What are you doing? Let's do it. Because it was just the right amount of insanity where it's like, it breaks the game, it breaks the mold, it's really unique. But I could also see where it was going to work. And it was like, let's do it. And those are the kind of things I think TFT actually needs more of, is those are just really weird, like, wait, the champ does what? So I think Bard is what I would give my favorite design to.
Nice. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And so TFT is coming up on its 2-year anniversary in just a couple months, right? And so over the last almost 2 years, you've played a lot of TFT, and you've watched a lot of TFT and made a lot of TFT. But my question for you is, in those last 2 years, what is your favorite TFT memory?
Oh, God. So you gave me this question beforehand, and it gave me some time to think about it. And I had it narrowed down to like 5. I'm going to try to get through a few of them because they're like different. They're favorites for different reasons. The first is one of my favorite as a developer was when we improved the initial item drop system way back in set 1, because it was my first big project on the team, where it was like, I'm going to change how the game fundamentally works. And I remember at the time, my boss and my boss's boss were both like, this seems bad. I don't think players are going to like this. I don't know what you're doing, but we trust you. Like, do your thing. And they were both so against it. And then we shipped it, and it worked really well. So it was one of those moments of just like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. It feels good. So on the dev side, that's one of my favorites. On the player side, kind of like on some fun stuff, I think it was set 2. We were doing a preview event, and it was like people were dialing in and playing on like a custom PvE lobby. This was for influencers, and they needed some rioters to fill in. So I filled in and played some games. And then the lobby was Disguised Toast, and he was recording sort of for his YouTube videos, which at the time he was really big into TFT. And I kept beating him, and he kept getting second. And he's like, "You're ruining my clickbait. What are you doing?" And so that was kind of fun. Just getting to toy with him a little bit. God, there's a bunch of other ones. Another one on the development side. So I've told this story before. Was like, Rise of the Elements was actually almost killed TFT. It didn't do very well. The numbers were very bad for a bunch of reasons. So leading up to Galaxies, we were all like nervous because it was like, this could be the last TFT set. We could be done after this. And again, I already told you about COVID and how the timing was, and we're all working from home. But the numbers going up and players really enjoying it and having fun, and that first initial hype of Galaxies and mobile was another big crowning achievement, I think, for our team. So that was a really big moment. World Fates Championship obviously is a big one, so that's been fun. And yeah, from there the list starts getting into other just fun ones and meme ones and things like that. But I think off the top of my head, those were sort of the biggest looking back at the last 2 years. Yeah,
I mean, they all sound like incredible memories. Some of which some of us have actually been a part of in some capacity. Yeah, and you know what, that's everything I have for you. But so before we go, is there anything you'd like to shout out?
The thing to shout out here is, while I am fortunate enough to be sort of, the representative of TFT quite often, the thing to remember is a team of people working their butts off to make the game as good as they can. Whether it be all the cool assets, the marketing, the maps, the little legends, the design, the balance, production, testing. There's a lot of people that put their heart and soul into it. It's not just the MORTDOG show. And so, again, I'm fortunate enough to represent them. But on behalf of the whole team, thank you all players for playing the game, enjoying the game. It means a lot to us. We're hoping TFT will be around for years, and good news is it looks like it will. So, that feels pretty good. But yeah, shout outs to the team. Shout outs to all of you for enjoying it. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I wish I could articulate it better, but I just want to say thank you, to your entire team. Seriously, you guys have made a game that means so much to me and means so much to so many people. And there are very few games that I feel like I can invest into like I can into TFT. So thank you guys for such an incredible opportunity and for a game that I love so much. And thank you everyone who's watching this interview, who got through all of this. I know this is a long one, but I had a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be a good one to watch. So make sure for more TFT guides, interviews, content, etc., make sure you guys subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.